So yeah, we're joined this evening by Dr. Antonio Rullan, who Principal Clinical Research Consultant at University College London, and he's come to discuss with us explaining clinical trials and current research. So I think over to you, Antonio, if that's okay.
All right. So hello everyone. I'm Tony Rullan. I'm a medical oncology consultant at the Royal Free, and I also work at the University College of London, doing research in oncology, both in clinical research, so that is participating in clinical trials, and also doing some translational research, which is the kind of research that we do, in which we take samples to the laboratory and we bring new drugs and new compounds from the laboratory into the clinic. So this is going to be a session in which I will explain about the kind of research that we do in oncology, focusing on the clinical trials. And this is the outline of the talk. So I will explain a little bit of what clinical research is and what types. Then I will explain the drug discovery process, which is the different steps and the different processes in which we get to go from a new compound to actually using it in patients. And then I will, the most of my talk will be about clinical trials, what they are, concepts and explanations about how a clinical trial works. It's going to be quite an introductory session, so I'm not going to go in depth in many topics, but I'm very happy at the end to get some questions and to delve deeper in some of these topics. So I guess that the first obvious question is why are we doing this research? Why are we doing this research on oncology? And the question may seem obvious, but the main thing is that we want to improve the treatments that we have. We want to improve the outcomes of the patients, and we want to improve the quality of life. So understand which patients are going to have side effects, which aren't, and to be able to support as much as possible. There are two main types of research that we do from a hospital. And this is the kind of studies that you could be approached if you are a patient, you go to hospital with cancer, and then maybe your doctor tells you, I would like to invite you, or I would like to explain this research project that we're doing. Would you like to participate? The main differentiation, the main categories are those that are observational. And that means that your treatment and your clinical pathway and the way you go and the way we support you through the disease is not going to change of what we call the standard of care, which is the treatment I would give even to any patient, and that is written in the guidelines and in the protocols. So the research bit means that we are going to look at maybe something in your blood, on something in the tissue that got for surgery, and we're going to bring that to the lab, and we're going to do some research to understand better what is the treatment doing to these cells or to this blood, or what are the different characteristics of the different tumors and of the different people. But the main thing here is we are getting some samples, your treatment is exactly the same. And then there is other clinical research, what we call interventional, in which we are changing the way we are treating the patients. So instead of receiving what we would call the standard of care, there is something that can be very small or it can be very big that will change and will be different. And the main reason to do that is because we want to see if changing something in the way we treat patients, we can improve the results and we can improve the outcomes. So in this talk, I'm going to focus on what is the interventional or the therapeutic research or trials. So this is probably the more scientific or the most complex slide that I'm going to show today. And it's just to give you an overview of the what are the new things or the new drugs or the new strategies that we're trying to use in oncology, and that are going to be the protagonist of the future clinical trials and the trials that are going on now. So one of them are the immunotherapies that we call immune checkpoints, and you would have heard in kidney cancer, we use frequently treatments against the PD-1, PD-L1 axis and against CTLA-4. And there is a lot of different other molecules in the interaction between the immune cells and the cancer that we're trying to see if they could improve the results of the immunotherapy. Then there is cell therapy, in which we extract cells from the tumor or from the blood of patients. We expand them and manipulate them in the lab to make them more able to eliminate cancer cells, and they are reinfused into the patient. So this has worked very well for some lymphomas and from some hematological malignancies, but it's quite challenging, and it is a very expensive and very difficult technique, but we are doing a lot of trials with this. Another hot topic, or another type of drugs that is being developed, are antibody drug conjugates. And to give you an idea, this is a type of chemotherapy, but instead of giving the chemotherapy on its own or free, so it has a lot of side effects, we are binding it to some antibodies, which are molecules that go specifically to a target, to a place in the tumor. And the idea is that they will only release the chemotherapy where the tumor is, increasing the effect on the tumor and diminishing the side effects in other organs. And then another thing that you would probably have heard in the news and in different media is that we have now the option of creating new vaccines. So this has been driven by the discovery of RNA vaccines, which are the same vaccines that were used for COVID. And we are then able to personalize these vaccines to try to stimulate the immune system to fight against the cancer. So if we want to bring all of these things from the laboratory and from the discovery science to the patients, what do we need to do? And this is what is called the drug discovery process. So first of all, we need to identify which are the things that we can do to target the cancer and to get good results or to stimulate the immune system. So that is done in the lab with different, sometimes animal models, sometimes cell lines, different techniques, different experimental approaches, which tell us, okay, this is something that is worth going for. So this is an alteration of cancer that we can use, a vulnerability that we can exploit. And then we need to find a molecule, an antibody, a drug, something that we can actually use to target that vulnerability. And we test that in different models of cell lines. So these are cells, cancer cells that are grown in a dish in the laboratory, or using animal models. And we need to see that these are A, working, so to say they kill cancer cells, and B, that they are not too toxic. So the way they work, they are going to be able to respect the normal cells and to be able to work so we can give them to patients. So once that is done, then it starts what is the actual clinical research, and that is what is called the clinical trials. So this is when these drugs, these new compounds, these new molecules are tested in patients. And I'm going to explain later more about the different phases and what we need for the clinical trials. And then after those clinical trials are finished, if they are A, working, meaning that the cancers are responding, and B, safe, meaning that the patients can tolerate the side effects, this can be reviewed and approved. This is done by different agencies, different countries, and if there is a satisfactory review, then these drugs will be approved, and then they can be given to patients in the clinic. I have put beneath the titles a little bit to give you an idea of how long it takes for all of this. And you can see that it's something that is in years and is normally a long time. We're working to try to bring this down, but there are many factors why this is like that, and is to make sure that we are only giving to patients drugs that are safe and are effective. So a clinical trial, basically, it's an experiment, all right? So we are trying a new thing, and we are doing an experiment in which there are patients that are participating. So it is very tightly regulated to make sure that the autonomy and the dignity of these patients is respected, and all of the experimental clinical trials that we develop, they need ethical approval by a committee that is formed by different experts, but also patient advocates and patient representatives, that they need to approve that this has been thought thoroughly and the risk benefit of participating in the trial is justified. And there is a lot of different international regulations that need to be followed, and we are very strict in making sure that there is no trial that has not been approved and that has not been looked at thoroughly at different levels. We are doing these clinical trials because we want to know, as I explained, that A, is this drug safe? And B, is this drug working? And there is a little bit of, so there are different ways in which we want to do that. And this is linked with the different phases and different stages in which we perform these clinical trials. So you may have heard already or not that there are different phases for the clinical trials, and it goes from phase 1 to phase 4. I'm going to talk only about phase 1, 2, and 3. So phase 1 is the first time that these drugs, these compounds, are given to people. They sometimes are done with healthy volunteers, but in oncology, they normally are performed in patients that do not have other good therapeutic options. And the main objective of these early phases of the trial is to make sure that this drug is safe and that we get as much information possible as to which kind of side effects, which kind of problems are we going to have with these drugs. Once we've determined which dose we can give to the patients and that which dose is safe, then we can move to the phase 2 and 3, in which we start to look not only at the safety, but also at the efficacy, meaning, are we making the tumors smaller? Are these tumors responding to the treatment? And as we go with the different phases, we increase the number of participants in the trials. At the beginning, we want to make sure that we have very close eye on these patients and we make sure that we have all of the information. As we know more about the side effects of the drug, then we can give it to more people and we can get better ideas about how it is working. And we end with these phase 3 trials that are normally large studies with sometimes hundreds of people, in which we need to know if the treatment is working or not. So this is a little bit, and I know this is a lot of information in this slide, and in the next slides I'm going to go into each of the parts in each of the circles, but is to give you an idea of what would happen to a patient when they are invited or when they discuss a clinical trial. So we start by identifying the patient that would be a candidate for a clinical trial, meaning that they have the kind of cancer, of the kind of disease that we are studying in that trial. And after that identification, then you may be in a hospital or a center that has clinical trials, and you may be offered the trial in your same hospital, or you may be referred by your doctor to another hospital that is doing these clinical trials, and then your doctor knows that this clinical trial is open and thinks that you could benefit from them. Once that happens, then the investigator, which is the doctors that are developing and participating in the clinical trial, will assess if the patient and if the type of cancer is the best fit for the trial. Because as I explained, so we have a trial in which we have a protocol, and it's very tightly regulated, and we need to fill in a series of conditions to make sure that the patient is the right fit for the trial, but more importantly, that the trial is the right fit for the patient and the patient could benefit from participating in this trial. So once this is satisfied and the patient is a good match for the trial and the trial for the patient, then we go to one of the most important, if not the most important part of the trial, which is the informed consent. So this is a conversation, and this happens both verbally and in writing, in which the investigator explains to the patient what is the trial, what will be done, what are the possible benefits, what are the possible risks, and what will the participant need to do in order to be part of the trial. Within the informed consent, there is a document that is normally called patient information sheet, in which it explains very clearly all of these benefits, all of these risks, what are the visits that the patient needs to do, which are the interventions or the observations that the patient will undergo during this trial, and how the investigator is going to deal with the different aspects of the trial. This can be a lengthy conversation, and this can take 30, 45 minutes, an hour. And it's very important that there is a good understanding from the patient and from the investigator of what is going to happen during the trial, because at the end of this process, the patient signs that he or she voluntarily wants to participate in the study. It is important for you to know that this is no kind of binding contract, and the patient is always free to stop participating in the trial at any point. And if that happens, then the doctor that is taking care of them will look for the next best alternative of treatment that is outside of a clinical trial. So once all of this information is shared and the patient agrees to participate, we start what we call the screening process. So in the screening process, we look at all of the information that we already had, and there are a series of tests. This can be CT scans, this can be blood tests, this can be heart scans, this can be a different sort of things. This can include analysis of the tumor. And this is to make sure, again, with all of these tests, that the patient is a good fit for the trial. And all of these results mean that this patient is not at the higher risk by participating in this study, but also that the patient complies with all of the criteria that are written in the protocol that have been agreed. So to say that this participant is going to help this study, help this trial, get the right outcomes in terms of, is this drug safe? Is this drug working, and is it going to help with the tumor? If all of these tests come back okay, and there is no red flag or no signal that this patient should not participate in the trial because the risks are too high, then we go to the part of the treatment. And here, there are few concepts that are probably not intuitive and hard to understand, and I'm going to focus on them for a bit, because they can be quite challenging for a patient to understand and for us as doctors to explain. And one of these concepts is the concept of randomization. When we are doing this clinical trial, this experiment, and we are in the late phases of the development of the drug, for most of its diseases, there will be already one treatment that we are using and that works for some patient. Therefore, our goal is to see if we can improve on that treatment. So we need two groups of patients. We need a group of patients that will receive the treatment that is already proved to be working and that we know how it works. And then there will be a different group of people that will receive the new treatment. So how do we decide which patients to go to the experimental group, which is the new treatment, or to the, as I said, the standard of care, meaning the treatment that we already use? So if you would let the doctors and the investigators choose which patient goes to which group, you would be introducing something that we call a bias. And that is that everyone has ideas or prejudgments or conceptions of which of the two arms, which of the two groups is going to be better for the patients. So there we would be inducing, or we will be including, a difference in how these patients are assigned to one group or the other. Therefore, we may be confounding the results of the trial because the two groups that we are comparing are not comparable, because we may be putting the patients that will do better in one group or the other, or we will be putting the patients that we think are not going to be as able to tolerate some side effects in one group or the other. And that is why the assignment of these patients to this group is made randomly. It's normal, it's not tossing a coin, but it's the same idea. So it's a computer system that takes some factors into account, but the end of the decision is that it's a random allocation. And if you do that with a large enough group of people, then you end up with two groups of people that are comparable, and then you have all of the information you need to decide if one treatment is better than the other. Another concept that sometimes is a little bit complicated to explain is the concept of placebo. So a placebo is an intervention that does not have any active ingredient. So for example, it would be to give somebody the active new drug, and then to the people in the other group, we would be given a tablet that has a little bit of sugar or that is empty of an active component. So there are fewer and fewer clinical trials that include a placebo option, because if we have a treatment that we know it works, it wouldn't be ethical and it wouldn't be right to give a patient a placebo. So this is only done in very specific situations in which we don't know if so we don't have a good treatment already, and we have reasonable doubts that maybe not doing anything or not giving anything may be better than actually doing the intervention. And this is important because sometimes the trials are successful and we get very nice results, and we get a drug that is approved and changes completely and revolutionizes the way we treat cancer patients. But it can also be that the new treatment is worse than the one that we are using. So that is a risk of clinical trials that is not frequent, but we need to make sure that we compare with the best option. And then after all of that, then the patient starts the participation in the trial. So if this is a drug, then the patient will receive this treatment either in the vein or as tablet. And this is when we want to be working very closely to the patients, because we do sometimes more tests, we do sometimes more visits that we would do outside of the trial, because we want to make sure that we detect early any signs that this treatment is working, not working, that the side effects are being worse than we expected, that we're having any issues. And there is, in the protocol of the trial, which is the document that defines what is going to happen in the different stages, there is a series of visits and a series of information that needs to be collected. And here, it's where it's very important, the communication with the patients. And what I always discuss, and what I like to think about this, is that if you are participating in these kind of trials, in these early phase trials and the phase 3 trials, you are to us a little bit what test pilots are for the people that develop jets or develop rockets to go into the space. So you are the one that you're on the cockpit, you are the one that is taking the risks, and you are the one that is trying new things. But we definitely want to know, what do you think about the plane? If it's flying all right, if you're having problems with it, what are your feelings? What are you thinking? Because that is what is going to help us to determine if this prototype, if this trial, if this new intervention is working as it should, and we can bring things higher and we can make things better. So I know I've given a lot of information. I hope that was clear. And I'm very happy. Thank you for your attention. And I would be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. It was really, really interesting. Thank you. So as Malcolm said, it is recording. So if you want to come on camera to ask a question, that's fine, but it will be part of that final edit. If you've got any questions, there's the Q&A or the chat section. So we'll just give people a little while if there's any questions to get them in. But yeah, that was very, very interesting. And it's interesting about how to see both. Oh, sorry, we've got a hand coming in, but I was going to say that they're not as common anymore because obviously there's a treatment that they can compare it to. So that was interesting. We've got a question here. What clinical trials are happening at the moment?
Right. So there are different clinical, there are lots of clinical trials happening. I'm going to focus obviously on kidney cancer. So we have clinical trials the same way that we have the different phases for each clinical trial or each drug. We have trials that can be given to patients or interventions that can be given to patients at different stages. So there will be trials that are comparing treatment of small renal masses. So, for example, there is some research happening that is comparing for people that have very small tumors if they should receive surgery and only remove a bit of the kidney, or if they should remove all of the kidney, so total nephrectomy versus a partial nephrectomy. There are some other trials that are comparing if we are getting, if the patient should get treatment, for example, with treatment with a needle, with an ablation of it, or surgery. And then we have trials for patients with advanced kidney cancer, so patients that are going to receive immunotherapy. So the trials that are happening at the moment, there are some trials that are given a vaccine, for example, an immunotherapy after the surgery to prevent the cancer from coming back. And then we have trials that are testing new drugs. So, for example, there are trials that are testing drugs that target the hypoxia pathway. That is one of the ones that is used by kidney cancer. There are trials that are comparing for the first line if we should give a combination of immunotherapy or if we should give a combination of tablets and immunotherapy.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've got a question here about how do you find out about clinical trials?
So the best way, I think, is asking your clinician or asking the doctor that is helping you, that's seeing you in clinic, because they would have normally a good idea of what is going on and they have a good understanding of what your exact clinical scenario or what is happening to you, and they could help. And then there are other ways in which you can find for clinical trials. So there is in CRUK, in the CRUK website, there's normally different ways of clinical trials that some charities, they also include clinical trials that are running. And then there is a website that is from the US government that is called clinicaltrials.gov, which includes almost all of the clinical trials that are running in the world. And then you could type your type of cancer, for example, and that will give you an answer of which trials are open. And it also has a section which says in which centers, in which hospitals that is happening. So mostly your doctor, but then there are also websites, and I think CRUK is a good platform also to look.
So, and I was just going to say, we also have on our website, if you type in clinical trials, it'll come up on our clinical trial page. And if you scroll down, there is a blue box that says antidote. Click on that and you can put your details in and it will bring you through to a site that will highlight clinical trials for you as well. So brilliant. Thank you for that. And are there any current trials that you know of at the moment regarding chromophobe RCC?
So, for example, we don't have any of these trials running at the Royal Free. It is difficult with, this is something that we deal with, and we have a lot of problem getting funding and getting companies to be interested because, as you know, so there are types of kidney cancer that are rarer. That means that there are fewer patients, and these trials are harder to bring. So, chromophobe is one of these. I know that Prof. Tom Pauls at Barts has a first-line trial that is looking at patients that includes patients with chromophore cancer. And then there will be other trials that will include any kind of kidney cancer, but is unfortunately is not a field in which we have a lot of clinical trials options and which have a lot of opportunities.
Thank you. Do you have any clinical
Sorry,
trial?
can I just say again?
Yeah.
But again, same with the chromophobe. I think the best thing would be to ask your doctor or the clinician that is helping you. Specifically, in my situation with this chromophobe, do you know of any trials? Can you ask around if there are any trials? Yeah. Go ahead, Hazel.
No, thank you. Do you have any clinical trials that don't involve drugs? For example, histotripsy.
Yeah, so absolutely. So that's what I was explaining at the beginning. So there are surgical trials in which the intervention is not a drug, but it can be a different type of surgery. And then, so for example, here we at Royal Free in collaboration with UCLH, we are doing different trials that are comparing a technique that's called cryoablation. And that is a fancy word to say that basically the radiologist puts a needle into the tumor, injects a gas that's very, very, very cold, and freezes the tumor. And that has the obvious advantage that it's not a surgery, so they don't need to even do the keyhole, they don't need to remove a bit of the kidney. But we need to know for sure that the results are going to be as good as the surgery. So there are trials going on that regard. You're muted, Hazel, sorry.
Thank you for that. Can UK patients enroll in European and USA trials?
So that is, in theory, yes. So there is nothing that would limit you participating in a trial anywhere in the world. However, in some cases, the participation in clinical trials is linked to institutions. And then, for example, if you were to come from Europe and wanted to participate in a trial that is performed at the NHS, you would need to be eligible to get NHS care because you are participating in a trial within an NHS institution. If you go to the US, for most of the trials, the expenses, so what is the cost of participating in the trial is covered by the sponsor, which is either the pharmaceutical company or the institution that is developing the trial. But in some occasions, that doesn't cover the full cost of the care. So, for example, if you're going to the US, you may need to have either insurance or the ability to pay for some of the care. But in theory, yes, there is no limitation. The same way that we are talking about NHS in England, if you were to go to Spain to a public institution, you may need to be eligible to be treated there for a clinical trial. So it may be a little bit complex on the administrative side, but from a research perspective, there is no limit.
Really interesting, thank you. Do all hospitals conduct trials? If not, and my hospital doesn't, will I miss out of being involved in an appropriate trial?
So not all of the hospitals run trials because there needs to be an infrastructure in terms of staff and in terms of facilities and in terms of administrative team to be able to open and run those trials. So participating in a trial is not the best option for all of the patients, but it can be really good for some patients. And again, that is a matter of thinking, okay, is it the right treatment for me? Is this the right trial for me? If a clinician does not have a good treatment option, they normally look for other options, even if it's in a hospital, so you could be referred for other trials. If you are interested in participating in clinical trials, again, ask your doctor, and they may be able to refer you to a hospital which has the trials. But I always think that you need to take into account also what is the potential benefit from participating in the trial, and what is the cost in terms of not money, but in terms of time and going to a different hospital and going to a different city and the time of displacement. And in some occasions, that will say yes, even if you need to move a lot and you need to travel far, you should look into participating in the trial. But in some of the cases, then the benefit is not that clear, and you may need to think what is most important for you. And if the most important thing for you is to be closer to your family and to be able to spend more times with I don't know, playing or going to a club in your town, then you also need to take that into account. But again, if you think there is a trial there, or if you don't know and you would like to know if there is a trial there, you can contact different organizations and you can ask your doctor, is there any trial for me? There's no harm in asking.
Brilliant. Thank you. Another question. I have a rare genetic kidney cancer, SDHB renal cell. Is there any trials for this? I'm currently on Ipi-Nivo and at Guy's.
So I am not aware that there is any specific trial that is working on this SDHB at the moment. You may be eligible for a trial that includes all types of kidney cancer, but again, especially for the newer drugs and the newer therapeutics, we don't use them if there is a treatment that is already approved that we know it's working and they may work very well. So if you are receiving a treatment and that treatment is working and you are having good response from the tumor and you're not having side effects, I don't think it's I'm not going to comment on any specific case. It's just a general, but you may not need, or you may not want to look for a trial if you have a treatment that is already approved and we know it's working, because any trial would be experimental, and you may be, like you probably want to receive first a treatment that is already approved, and then that changes with different moments and different times, and trial gets closed and trials get open. So the moment to look for a trial or to discuss or to ask for a trial is normally when you are going to change treatment, or when there is something that needs amending or that needs changing or needs to be added. Because if things are working, then at this point, it's not only that you maybe don't want to, but also that the trials are designed in a way that they are action, or they are activated in this situation in which you need to change treatment. If you are having a treatment that works, it would be unethical to stop that treatment to enroll you in a trial, unless the trial this while you are having this treatment, we can add or not this one. I'm sorry, that was a bit of a convoluted answer, but I hope it was clear. If there's any follow-up questions, please write it on the Q&A.
Thank you. Somebody's commented how they had failed immunotherapy, Ipi-Nivo, which left them with many endocrine problems and a damaged immune system, and that this has now excluded them from many aspects of trials, apart from control arms, but only in some.
Yes. So that is something that can happen. So as I explained, the trials, we are using new targets, we're using new drugs, and we don't know if they are going to be safe or not. And that means that sometimes patients that have had problems, or they have diseases in other organs, or they had previous problems with the treatment, may be excluded from these trials. And the reason for that is that there is the likelihood that these new drugs are going to be even riskier for these patients, and therefore the people that are writing the protocols, but also the ethical committees that are reviewing, they would say, we don't think it's wise or safe to include these patients because the risk is too big, and we always need to put in the balance the risk and the benefits, because the benefits are a huge unknown. So if the risks are too high, then that is not probably the best option. And having had prior toxicity, prior side effects, or other problems means that you would exclude them from the trial. So on that point, whenever we participate in the design of a trial and we talk with different pharmaceutical companies, there is always a little bit of tension, because we want to include as many patients as possible, to make sure that we benefit as many patients as possible, but we also want to make sure that we are giving this treatment in a safe way, and we are not going to harm the patients. But it's a tricky one, and I understand it can be frustrating to be excluded trials because you've been unlucky. So I think that that's a fair point, but we also need to take into account that we need to give it these drugs in a safe manner.
Yeah. Can I join a trial even though surgery, etc., and immunotherapy hasn't worked for me?
Yes. So as I said, the different trials can be given at different stages of the disease. So for the patient that needs surgery, then they can have a surgical trial. Patients. So we are. We are in the UK. We are trying to open a trial that is a first-line trial that will compare a treatment with immunotherapy combination or a treatment with immunotherapy and tablets in the first line. And there will be other trials that are for people that are in the second line or the third line of treatment, and even trials for people that do not have uh, any approved drug that is used as a standard of care. And these people will go to early phase clinical trials we are testing these drugs for the first time. So again, if you are in this situation, ask your doctor, are there any trials that could be for me? And the answer may be yes, there are trials, but then the answer may be also, I think, in this situation and with your specific cancer and how things are going, I believe that the best option is to give you a treatment that we already know how it works and we already have more information on safety.
Are you working with other countries?
So yes, so a lot of these trials are international collaborations. So for example, most of the early phase clinical trials are opened in multiple countries, the US, the UK, Europe. There's a lot of trials happening in Hong Kong, Shanghai, Australia. Um, so there's a lot of collaborations. For the largest trials, they are almost by definition international because they want to prove that this treatment works for a wider population. And there are some differences between people that live in the UK and people that live in China in terms of the type of cancer, the genetics, and all of that. So most of these trials, these large trials, are international collaborations with different countries, different centers, to make sure that then the results are applicable to the whole of the population and not only to a small population in a country.
Thank you. What type of things stop people being eligible for an immunotherapy drug trial?
So, for example, if you have an autoimmune disease, especially if it's been severe and you had needed corticosteroids to treat it, that can you prevent you from participating in this trial because there is the chance that if you receive this immunotherapy drug that is stimulating your immune system, this previous autoimmune disease may be worsened or maybe flared. So that's one of the things. Then sometimes also if you have metastases in the brain that are not controlled, because the immunotherapy can cause inflammation and that can make worsen the symptoms of brain metastases, that can be also excluding the patient from that. If you or if you have any other serious disease of the heart, or for example, or of the lungs, that may make it harder or riskier for you to participate in the trial.
Thank you. I've had immunotherapy infusion 7 years ago. I'm now on a third line drug, everolimus. Can you have another type of immunotherapy again?
So again, that depends very much on how things are going. So after immunotherapy, and if you're on everolimus, there is no standard of care option with immunotherapy that is approved. But for example, if you were to participate in a trial that includes immunotherapy, then you could receive some immunotherapy. And the reason for that is that all of the evidence that we have shows that once your tumor is resistant to the type of immunotherapy that we use routinely in kidney cancer, repeating that immunotherapy is very unlikely to work. So you could have immunotherapy, but not the ones that we normally use in kidney cancer, but a different, maybe a novel one. And that would be inside the clinical trial in which there have been a careful assessment of the risk and the benefits, and there is the thinking that this combination of immunotherapy, this different type of immunotherapy could be of benefit, and could revert the resistance to the normal immunotherapy.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, forgive me. I think I'm just double checking. I think we've had somebody put a question in the Q&A and in the chat. So I'm just double checking it's not different information. I don't want anybody to be missing out. I think that is the case. But if I'm wrong, please feel free to pop it back in. Is there a risk that the type of research undertaken will be driven by the amount of profit for a pharmaceutical company rather than the clinical needs of patients?
So yes, so the honest answer to that is yes. So there are, so what is sure is that the research that is undertaken, even though it's paid for pharmaceutical companies, it may be guided for their interest. There is a lot of safeguards in terms of government, NHS organizations, and the clinicians, in which we wouldn't participate in any trial that we think is only driven by benefit and is not going to benefit patients. There are some like theories and some things about what the pharmaceuticals do and they don't. And whenever you put money in the mix, it is a risk. But I always said, and I always think that the best way of making money for pharmaceutical companies is developing drugs that work, and they are good, they're effective, and they're not toxic. Because these drugs are going to be used, and these drugs are going to be used a lot. So the main objective of a pharma company is develop drugs that work, and they're putting a lot of money and they want their money back. But most of them, what they do is they create drugs that work. It is true that if there is a type of disease, and this is what we discuss about the rare kidney cancers, that is unlikely to bring a lot of money, there will be less interest for the pharmaceutical companies to pay for these trials because it is a lot of money and they want returns. And the way to overcome that is, so for example, in the UK, we are very lucky because we have strong charities that are paying for trials that are not that interesting for pharmaceutical companies. We also have government funding, and that is where the academic trials go in which doctors and groups of doctors and associations of doctors that they see the needs, and even if they wouldn't be a profit, if it's a need for our patient, we create groups of clinicians that are interested, and then we ask for money to charities, and we ask for money to the government to run these trials that may be not interesting to pharmaceutical companies. But the fact that it's a risk is true, but as long as we live in a capitalist system, I don't think we can really get away with that.
Okay. What screening do you generally do to see if patients are likely to respond well to the clinical trial? For instance, I have papillary type renal cell, so will a trial for the more common kidney cancer help me?
So that is a very complex question. So it depends on what the trial is testing and what are the drugs. So for example, you remember I mentioned these antibody drug conjugates that have this antibody, which is a very special molecule, a very special chemical substance that detects only one type of alteration or one protein or another molecule. So, for example, if you are running a trial with that, you need to check on the tumor that this target is expressed on the tumor of the patient that you're going to give the drug. Because if not, then that antibody is not going to go to the tumor and is not going to have an effect. So this is one way, for example, in which we check if this in this screening we run all of these tests, and if the patient's tumor has this target, it doesn't have the target, then we wouldn't advise for the patient to participate in the trial. Regarding papillary and other types of kidney cancer, we know that there are some similarities and there are some differences in the way that they respond to treatment. So the reason why some trials are only including clear cell, which is the most common type of kidney cancer, may not be because we don't think that it could work in papillary at all, but it may be because we want to make sure that we have a homogeneous group of patients that have similar diseases and the results can be cleaner. So there are some treatments that the trials are made only on one type of kidney cancer, but then if the treatment is approved and funded for different types of kidney cancer, then we extrapolate and we use these for patients that have different type of kidney cancer. And then after a while using that in these patients, then we can do a collection of what we call real world data or real world evidence, in which outside of clinical trial, we explore these patients that are given this treatment, is it working or not? So it could be that a drug that has been tested in clear cell could be okay also for papillary, but that's harder because we don't have the clinical trial evidence. We don't have very strong evidence that is going to work or not. So that needs to be an individualized decision in every case between the clinician and the patient, and there needs to be understanding of the potential risks and the benefits to decide if you go ahead or not.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just going to say, looking at time, I think I'm going to just call a close on any new questions being put into the Q&A. And if anybody's got any further questions, you can email support@caseuk.org.uk. That's support@caseuk.co. No, support@caseuk.org.uk. But we'll go through the ones that are there now, but no new questions, please. So what screening do you generally do to see if patients are likely to respond well to the clinical trial? For instance, I have pillary type renal cell, so will a trial for the more, oh, I do apologize, we've just done that one. Okay. So my hospital have openly said they rarely have kidney cancer patients, but have said they will seek advice from another hospital, but it has to be my choice. And this is about chromophobe RCC. Have you got any suggestions about an area or a hospital that has an interest in chromophobe or anything support with that?
So again, we don't have any trial with chromophobes at the Royal Free, and I'm not, as I said, I am aware of a trial that is running at Barts. That's only for first line. So I'm sorry I can't help more. I'm not aware of any other trials at the moment. And then, but the largest kidney cancer units are probably, so as at the Royal Free, then Barts, and then the Marsden. They have a lot of trials. Then up north, Manchester, Christie has also a large clinical trial, and then some centers in Edinburgh. So I would say, your doctor is probably the one that knows more about your case and is able to point you to the right direction.
Thank you. Why can you only have immunotherapy for 24 months at the moment?
So that is true for the patients that are receiving a treatment from the beginning with a combination of a tablet at the immunotherapy. So for patients that started the immunotherapy with the combination of ipilimumab and nivolumab, there is no stop on the nivolumab, or for patients that are receiving the nivolumab a second line. The reason why, if you are receiving the combination of tablets and immunotherapy, you only will receive 2 years of immunotherapy is because the clinical trials that were done with that combination were designed with that. And the approval from the NICE or from the NHS for funding is limited to 2 years. So it's because the trials that were done with that combinations were done in which the immunotherapy was stopped at 2 years. It's a very interesting question, both scientifically and clinically, to know if going after 2 years continuing the immunotherapy is actually beneficial or not. Because some doctors and some patients think that the longer the better, but it's also true that sometimes you stop the immunotherapy and you still have a response and you are not getting any treatment. You're not having more chances of having side effects, but your immune system is already activated and it can eliminate the cancer. And there is a trial that is called REFINE that is looking into that and is, for example, giving less immunotherapy, so every 2 months instead of 1 month. And we're looking into that. But it is a good question, and we don't have a clear answer. But the trials were done 2 years of immunotherapy, and that's what's approved.
Thank you. And do you have an opinion or any information on the dendritic cell therapy. Has the UK trialed this yet, specifically for kidney cancer?
So I have not participated in any research with dendritic cells in kidney cancer. This kind of treatment is the same idea. So dendritic cells are a type of cells that they tell the immune system that this is dangerous and you need to look into that. So it's similar to what would be a vaccine. So it is an interesting concept, but there is no really an approved therapy for kidney cancer with dendritic cells that has been proven effective. So this would be mostly research, and I would say that this should be done in an experimental setting, a part of a clinical trial, in my opinion. But I have no specific data on that to be able to comment.
Thank you. Thank you. So somebody's saying here that they took part in the Rampart trial, and then a year later they had a recurrence, and then since then they had genetic testing which indicated that the tumor would not respond to checkpoint inhibitors. Is this something that would be done routinely, checking before somebody starts if they're going to respond? Is there something?
So, I mean, some trials do, some trials don't. And then it's a bit tricky because we don't have a perfect test to say if the tumor will or not respond to checkpoint inhibitors. So the information that you would get from the genetic testing is an information on likelihood. So it is more likely or less likely that you would respond, but we don't have a yes or no answer to that in any marker. It doesn't matter how much money you pay, it doesn't matter what type of test you do. We still don't have a clear, these patients will respond to immune checkpoints, these patients won't respond. So we can have inclinations. So the trial was designed in a way that it included all of the patients independently of what they did, and that was the trial was reported. I completely agree. I think we should do more testing and we should get more markers to be able to be better at determining which patients will benefit from a drug or not. It's not as easy because, as I said, we've done a lot of research and we have kind of clues or indications, but we don't have a perfect marker. And it's also something that is expensive, but also it can take time to get those results. And sometimes you want to start treatment before you get them. But completely agree, we should do more testing. We should be doing more personalized medicine.
And final question, are there any trials for adjuvant treatment?
So yes, so I know that there are trials open, which are for adjuvant treatment. So adjuvant means that after the surgery, you get the treatment that reduces the chances of the tumor coming back. And I know, for example, that at VARS there is a trial open, which is a combination of immunotherapy, pembrolizumab, that we use as a standard of care in kidney cancer, with a vaccine, a personalized vaccine. And I think it's also open in all the hospitals across the country. So that trial is a trial by MSD, and is adjuvant vaccine trial. You can ask about it to your doctor.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. So we've come to the end of our webinar. There's a few thank yous in the chat saying that was a very informative webinar, which it very, very much was. Thank you so much for taking the time, and thank you so much for taking the time over the questions. It's been brilliant.
That's all right. Thank you very much, everyone.